Now, first up, we are talking about Black Bag, which is the new film directed by Steven Soderbergh. This is the second collaboration of the year by Steven Soderbergh and writer David Koepp. They last worked together on Presents, which came out back in January, and now they're teaming up again to tell a spy thriller story which stars Michael Fassbender, Cate Blanchett, Tom Burke, and many, many other very famous faces. I thought this was a very interesting film because it wasn't what I expected. The trailers very much tease quite a high octane sort of game of cat and mouse, very much in the vein of something like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy or Day of the Jackal. But actually the film is much more kind of elegant and sleight of hand than that, which perhaps took me a bit off guard. But Jake, tell me, what did you make of Black Bag?
Yes, I thought it was interesting because, again, you talked about the trailers presenting this idea of a film. How do you get people's bums in seats for a spy film? You kind of have to give it a Bondian flair, because what do people think of spy films? What are the most famous spy films? And you have to go to that great British classic, now taken over by an evil corporation, James Bond. Something that you and I both love. I kind of appreciated how small it was. Michael Fassbender was interesting. I didn't enjoy the performance at the very beginning, but I sort of settled into it because he's very, very cold, very, very cold. And the story hinges on the relationship he shares with Cate Blanchett and their marriage. The great crux of the film is how do relationships survive in the working spy world. There's a couple of couples who are spies, and yet they have affairs, or they have, of course, obvious trust issues. There's a line that's present in the trailer, which is, when you lie about everything else, how can you be truthful about anything? Or along those lines. And I think it's a very good, interesting point. And when I was looking up stuff after I watched the film, I was like, well, that was the crux that David Koepp sort of wrote about when he did his research with spies, is that how do you maintain honesty with a loving partner? And that's sort of what the film becomes. It's actually more of a thesis on relationships than on the world of spying. I think it has that flair to it. It really does. It has a moment of, actually, we're trying to work out almost a murder mystery, almost a thievery. There's a theft in the film, a major theft, but to do in the secret agent world. An evil weapon that James Bond would want to get back. But, it's dealt with like, oh, we're trying to figure out who released it. But then there's lots of crossing lines and there's lots of very subtle bit of spying going on between Michael Fassbender, who's very good at reading liars. He's got a knack for it. He is the king of the polygraph test, or whatever they call him in this film. And to be honest, I quite enjoyed it. I sort of started and I was a bit like, well, what's this really about? Like, what's it really going to present? I really miss James Bond. Come on, come back with something new or a little bit of information. But I was sort of sat there and I actually really fell into it. I think Cate Blanchett was incredibly engaging, even though she's not very much on screen. And I think it did really want to subvert your expectations because Pierce Brosnan is in the film. It's a very obvious linking connection between British spy films, and I thought, well, that's interesting. You're kind of subverting the edge. You're sort of trying to give us a different take at what this genre can be, because, with the last James Bond film, again, I keep referring to it because it reminds me of it because of how British it is as well. It's just very, very British. Even the actors who are not British are doing very Britishy accents. And I think that it has that connective tissue, but then also it is like that more mature. It's like a one-off sort of short film idea of what if James Bond was actually a really serious spy thriller? What if they still looked really cool in Michael Fassbender's very sturdy, turtle-necked persona? I thought it was an interesting film. I do have this theory, though. If I actually sat down and thought about the mystery, would it unravel? I haven't given much thought because I quite enjoyed just the presentation. Everything is very well directed. It's very well acted, and I thought some of the dialogue was a little forced, but then the rest was really fluid. I thought this motif of having a dinner party that comes back. And it's a really interesting scene because it's almost used as interrogation, but done through this trying to be domestic, but then becomes something much more with a deeper ulterior motive. I think it's a really interesting tool, a cinematic tool to get that across. I thought that was really refreshing. The first dinner party scene, I thought some of the dialogue was a little forced because it sounded it needed to set the scene. But when it flowed into it, when we were actually getting the actors to act, it felt very stage play-like, even with the acting presentation, the way they sort of formed their sentences, the way they were allowed to flow on a thought rather than constant back and forth. It was actually really interesting. But, after that, I think everything became much more cohesive, like emulsified as a film. It really did get into a really nice place. Generally, I enjoyed the film. I would recommend it. It's a good sit down for a more mature audience, I think. It's not gripping in the same way it presented itself as, but it is gripping in a different way. And by the end of the film, I was trying to figure out in my head, which is always the best type of Christie type drama. Had a very Poirot edge to it. But I'd love to know your opinions, Reuben, because I kind of get a sense that you were taken away from that. Maybe the fact that it was presented so jarringly different, was that something that affected your viewing experience?
It was. So I just found this, and I hate to use this criticism, I found it a little bit slow. I found it a little bit too understated. I think there's supposed to be a kind of a delicious element of subterfuge and an erotic charge to it that I didn't really feel. There are repeated moments where characters talk about the relationship between Michael Fassbender's character and Cate Blanchett's character as being sexy, forbidden, but somehow they make it work. Relationship in which they're both spies and they both have secrets, but somehow their love brings them together. I didn't really feel that. I didn't really believe that much in the central relationship because I didn't feel like we were given much of an in to either character. Michael Fassbender, as you say, he's playing this incredibly kind of aloof, I think very Sherlock Holmes inspired character actually. There's a lot of, I think, the poise and precision and the all-seeing nature of Sherlock Holmes in his approach. Although I thought his accent was a little bit sketchy at times, I have to say. But it's a film that reminded me in many ways of, and I mentioned it in the introduction, the Thomas Alfredson Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is an unbelievably acclaimed film. I have to say, I didn't understand it at all when it came out. I think perhaps I am too stupid for these films. There were moments in this where I just felt slightly lost. I think that as much as you're right, some of the dialogue in the early scenes is on the nose in terms of providing exposition, perhaps it wasn't expositional enough for me because I was a little bit disengaged at moments and I wasn't entirely following it. For, I would say, a solid third of the film, it for me kicks into gear about 2/3 of the way through, where we have a polygraph scene where we're starting suddenly to get under the skin of these characters. And that for me is where it came to life. And then it has an excellent denouement where we have everyone gathered in a dining room for dinner and there's a loaded gun on the table. So, it gets there, but I found it a little bit slow, a little bit too cold, a little bit too clinical. I felt like I couldn't get into the film's skin because it perhaps was too reflective of the aloofness of its central characters. But it was okay. I had a perfectly fine time. I enjoyed the conclusion much more than the first hour. And the good thing is, it's only 90 minutes long. A lot of the films we're talking about this week are in and out 90-minute films. And I think that does play to this film's strength because, honestly, I think if it was longer, I would have struggled more with that lack of emotional investment. So broadly, it's good. Let's play a game. They're always playing games in the film. Let's play a game. So this film, it stars former Bond, Pierce Brosnan. It stars former Moneypenny in Naomi Harris. It stars failed Bond in Michael Fassbender. We know that he's been talking a lot in the press recently about his doomed audition in which he just kept saying how good Daniel Craig would be for the role. We have the best Bond we never got in Tom Burke. And then we also have aspiring Bond in Regé-Jean Page, who has been talked about a lot as a potential future candidate for 007. So I think that's quite a fun way of viewing the film. But I wish that this had had a bit more of the 007 fun, honestly, because I just didn't think it was that much fun. Which was a shame given the cast. It reminded me, although I preferred this other film, it reminded me of the, I think, 2021 movie, All the Old Knives, which is similarly a kind of spy thriller which all takes place in a restaurant. It stars Thandwe Newton and Chris Pine. as CIA operatives who meet in a restaurant. They haven't seen each other for a long time. And as they talk, secrets start to come out. And it's very stage-like, a bit like this film is at times. And it's entirely about the dialogue and entirely about this very tight-knit interpersonal connection. But for me, it manages to generate the drama and the intrigue in a way that Black Bag I just found at times a little bit inert. So it's okay. It's a 3-star film from me. I wouldn't not recommend it. And, if you're a Soderbergh fan, and to be honest, I am. I raved about Erin Brockovich last week, one of my favourite films. It's certainly a good addition to his oeuvre and, yet another kind of interesting slice of what Steven Soderbergh wants to do with cinema.
Yes, he's definitely a working director, and that's very inspiring to see. It's just that we've covered 3 of his films now, including this one, and all 3 are vastly different films that could have been made by vastly different filmmakers with less versatility. You touched on a point there that I do think you are completely correct about, which is fun. There's no fun to it. That's why I said mature. It feels a bit like bran flakes. You can get a lot out of them. They are very nutritious, and you could probably have a good time if you like that sort of thing. But sometimes you need Frosties or Cocoa Pops or something to get the blood pressure up. And this film doesn't do that. It is not exciting. There is a shot in the trailer that would suggest there's a bit more action. There isn't. It's very done quite cinematically, quite not in the glorious gratuity of these sorts of films. It was really missing. You also picked up a point of some people's accents in this film. Naomi Harris is from Blackpool, apparently. And viewers, I'm from the north. I'm from Bolton, which is a short train away from Blackpool. My accent's not very strong, except when I'm talking to fellow northerners. But Naomi Harris was doing a very posh accent and then sometimes said, "Oh, I'm psychiatrist, aren't I?" It was ridiculous.
Yeah, I know. It was one of those things where I had no idea that she was doing an accent until someone explicitly mentioned she was from the north, and I sort of went, "Is she?" And then I was sort of listening out for it, and every now and again, as you say, she drops a shortened sound. That's about it. Yeah, it's all right, isn't it? It's, it's stylishly directed. It's got decent score. It's got sort of okay pacing. I've seen some 5-star reviews for this, and I have to say, that baffles me a bit. I'm delighted that people have had a much better time than me, but I think people have found it, as I mentioned, I think people have found it quite sexy, and I really wasn't getting that.
I think you'd find it sexy if you really like the actors. I think if you just want to see them wearing nice clothes, this film is great for you. If you want to see Cate Blanchett in a great coat, this is that film. She's wearing a great coat.
She wears the most phenomenal roll neck at one point, and I'm wearing a roll neck today.
Look, Reuben could be in this film. I would see Reuben as a spy. That would add a bit more flair to this film, I think. Reuben's right. I like the film in the moment. That's the thing I'll say about it. But, in a week, I'll still be thinking about The Living Daylights or The Spy Who Loved Me. But I won't be really thinking about Black Bag. I don't think it really does enough because it's got all these links to, as Reuben said, these great links to this spy dynasty of British cinema. And yet it doesn't really do enough to sell itself. It has some really interesting sequences. It feels like a TV episode, like a good TV drama on ITV or maybe on BBC Two. That's what I'll give it. It's enjoyable in that sense, but you flip over at the end and you put, the news on, or you watch Pointless or something. You just forget about it. And okay, it's good, but I think it wants to be more than it is. I think it does want to be richer than it is with a relatively intricate storyline. But it kind of, if you're not doing a bit of the thrills, you can't really have the attention of myself or my esteemed colleague, because Reuben's right, 3 stars, which is fine.
The thing is, to extend the metaphor of the film's title, on the surface, Black Bag is kind of, it's sleek, it's sexy, it's mysterious. Oh, Black Bag, no one knows what's going on, everyone's got secrets. But actually, as much as it looks like a lovely, chic, cool spyware black bag, when you open it up, it's completely empty. And that, for me, is a bit of a disappointment.
That was a brilliant way to end. I just want to say that in this film, I also think the bag they use is charcoal grey. So